Hi, how you doing? It's week 3 of this 27-part series looking at it's not 27 parts, right? But it's week 3, and I hope you're enjoying it. We're still here. So we've got to talk more about this guy David, and he's a key hero in the Old Testament. He's an important figure, all that sort of stuff. But we love him for so many different reasons. And we've talked about the fact that he was chosen by God. We've talked about the fact that step number 1 on his development in terms of pursuing God was this heart of worship. And I think that worship thing we talked about last week is it's sort of the underpinning, like with that worship heart, that's what it means to pursue God, you know? And one of the things we've said all along, and I think it's really important that we need to remember that who David was pursuing was more important than what he was doing. Because his whole life story is full of these like seriously crazy ups and downs. Like his highs are higher than most people's highs, and his lows are pretty bad as well, right? But right through all of it, what's most important in the story of David is that he had this heart after God. You know, that's what God said about him, and that's what we can see in his story, and that's what should be something that we can focus on, you know, because whoever we are, whatever we're called to do, whether we're a shepherd boy or whatever we're called to do in business, in our, for me as a dad or a husband or a leader, whatever we're doing, we can all pursue God in it, you know, at any stage of our life, whether you're a young person or an old person, you know, whatever, whoever you are, you can always pursue God in what you're doing.
And it's not a bad thing to be known for as a man or a woman after God's own heart. That's not a bad thing to end up. The sum total of your life was that person pursuing God. Like, you'd feel pretty stoked.
Yeah, it's better than like, oh, he had a really cool train set, or
he had a nice Camaro.
Yeah, he had a really good head of hair, or
great
you know, just like actually, you had a heart that was about the invisible and the purposes of God,
the unseen things of God.
The unseen things of God, so important.
So this week we're talking about David the warrior. So there's a pretty well-known story, and I know Jordan well enough to know this is it's still your favourite story.
I think it is. In so many ways, the story of David and Goliath is the only story in the Bible.
David and who?
David and Goliath.
Okay. News to me.
You've never heard of it? Yeah. It's like a David and Goliath type battle. And
That's right.
The story is so powerful, and it gets referred to, the story of David and Goliath gets referred to in the newspapers every time.
It's transcended everything, right?
Every time a big sports team with all the stars gets upset by a small team, you know, without any, you know, non-professional team, like every time, and every year in the FA Cup. You know, one of the lower-ranked teams, it's a David and Goliath moment, and everybody in the world loves it. Every human being loves the moment where they love the underdog. The underdog beats this giant, and we see that in the story. It's such a rich story. It's so amazing, but often it's disconnected from the backstory. It's just like David appears on the scene and he's brash and he's talking up his chances, and then he ends up defeating this giant in battle, right? But it's connected to what we said already. David was called by God and he took it seriously, and he was this worshiper, and that positioned his heart in a way that when he was confronted by this physical reality, which is this battle scenario with this giant, 9-foot tall giant, challenging him to single combat, everyone else was focused on the giant. It's amazing if you read the story. It goes through and it says how long his spear was. It says how broad his spear was. It describes all his armor. It tells how tall he was. Like everyone was focused on the giant. And David says, who is this guy to stand in front of God? So David's got this view. He can see the giant. He's not ignoring the reality, right? He can see the giant, but he can see God too. Whereas everyone else can just see the giant.
So he's the only one that comes to the battle line, and he's not even supposed to be there. He's still out tending the field.
He's still just doing his job.
He's bringing sandwiches, right, to his brothers to go, hey guys, Mum said you needed food. Here you go. And then he looks at this guy, and it's like his first reaction.
Who's this guy?
Who's he? Define the armors of the living God. It's so different to every single person on the battlefield. He's looking at something different because of his origin story.
I agree, and I think that's amazing. And I think we sometimes think it's just David was super brave,
and
super accurate, huge amount of faith. Really good with the sling. And then there's all sorts of different ways you can look at the story. But I think one of the critical things for us to think about when we're faced with challenges, where do you find the courage to actually go up against the challenge? You know, because we can all think, well, God can help me with the challenge. You know, so you're dealing with a difficult situation at work, or you've got big bills to pay, or the car's broken down, or you've got challenges in your marriage. These are things that really frighten us, right? But how do you lean in to a challenge like that and take it on? You know?
And how do you take it on in a way that's consistent? So what I like about David, I think we mentioned it last week as well, was I still love this thought of this sort of spiritual muscle memory.
Yeah.
If I teach my boys to play football, they're already just about better than me.
Yeah.
But I know that the more often that the time that they just keep kicking the ball the same way over and over and over and over and again, when you're under pressure, when there's a situation, when there's a Goliath facing you, the default from David was straight away to go, hang on, who is he?
He's straight away, he's like, no, he's big, God's bigger.
Yeah.
And so often for us, it's like, that bill's big. It's so big. It's really big, right? And we start to make the challenge bigger because we've lost that, you know. And so again, it really, this week really points back to last week and says, hey, that worshiper thing, that heart really after God is really good. It's like all the soldiers, they were getting fired up every day, but they couldn't follow through and take on the challenge.
Yeah. Well, you often speak about that. The soldiers sharpen their pointy sticks. So we sharpen the tools of our trade and we go, because they were just yelling at each other.
They're getting all excited.
No one was doing anything.
Yeah. The Bible says that they did their war chanting every day.
Yeah.
And then when Goliath would come out and challenge them, and then they'd all be too scared to fight him. Yeah. Whereas David sees it once and goes, oh, hold on, who's this guy? And then he takes on the challenge with what he has, with who he is, and he trusts God in it. Yeah. But that didn't come from nowhere. That faith didn't come from nowhere, right? Don't wait for a challenge to develop a heart after God. You go, okay, here's a challenge. For me to have the courage, I need to have, no, today, let's develop a heart after God. Let's get a view of
the challenge
him.
Away.
No.
I think we think, oh, God, take away the hard things because my life's supposed to be so much easier with you now. And God says, well, I never promised you an easy life. Yeah. I love the thought that God doesn't give us escape. He gives us equipment.
Yeah, that's cool.
He doesn't give us escape, he gives us equipment. Yeah. And the equipment that David had was he was a worshiper. His backstory, think about your Marvel origin stories. His origin story was he was a worshiper. Yeah. It doesn't sound, is that it? Yeah, that's it. That's what he did. He worshipped, he played the harp, he knew what it was. If you remember from last week, he changed the environment that King Saul was in. The demon left because of his worship. So he knew what it was to change things in the unseen world.
Yeah. Well, I think we either operate in the unseen world, right? Yep. We either operate in the unseen world and then allow our vision of God to influence the physical realities, right? Or we allow our physical realities to change our view of God, right? And if we do that, we're always going to be the victim of whatever's happening next. Yeah. We're going to be the victim of the next bill, the next illness, the next crisis.
Because there's always something coming.
There is,
there's always something coming.
Because we live in a world that's full of badness, right? And we live with it. It doesn't matter. You're never gonna avoid it. You can't escape it, like what you're saying. But we can get a view of God that allows us to refocus what's happening in front of us, right? So everyone else is scared about the Goliath. David wasn't scared of Goliath. He was aware of how big God was, how powerful God was.
That's a great thought, because I like that thought that when we, sometimes in church life we say, come on, let's magnify God. Yeah. And the thought is we're not making God bigger in the sense, he's big. Yeah. But in our mindset is we are making him bigger than the situation. We're actually saying, God, you are bigger than the things that I'm facing today. Yeah. So we're magnifying him because he can't get any bigger than he is. He created everything. Yeah. But we are saying, no, God, we are choosing to put you first over every situation. Yeah, exactly. And then the default is, well, God's already bigger. God's already done it. God's already...
Yeah, and I think you can think of that from like a physics perspective, the size of God and the size of the problem. But it's much more about how it affects us personally.
It affects us,
When we allow God to be big in our view, like our frame, our perspective is focused on God, right? Those other things, so, the old song, the things of this world grow strangely dim when we look at God, right? You never quote a song around Jake, right? But the reality is, for how that works for me in my heart, is that when I lose that focus on how big God is, I cannot find the courage to face up to challenges. Yeah. Right? When I've focused on God and I think, God's big, God's got a plan and I've got a role to play in it, then I find myself, without any G'ing up, I find myself leaning into the challenges of life rather than running away from them.
And that links into that great verse in Hebrews, I think 6:19, where it's described, he's an anchor for our soul.
Yeah. Our hope in Christ is an anchor for us. It is one of that's my favorite New Testament story, the scripture. I think it's beautiful. It's the anchor for our soul. And it talks about how Christ is the anchor for our soul. It stretches into the unknown, into the unseen, right?
Yeah, and again, that's
through the veil into the unseen. And it's actually, that's what connects us to the bigness of God is Christ, and is that hope in our heart. Yeah. And so when we're talking about David as a warrior, We've talked about how he's chosen and anointed. We talked about how he's a worshiper. We talked about how he's a warrior. And I think being a warrior is important, but it's when we're going to be a warrior, where are we going to draw the strength from?
Yep.
And it's our heart connection, our pursuit of God that's most important.
So a great question for you to ask is then what's anchoring your soul?
Yeah. Where do you get the courage from? Where do you get strength from?
Because the anchor is a great point, because if you think about it, you're on a boat in the ocean, tides come and go, things happen around us. So the boat swayed left and right and north and south, but the anchor is still fixed. So there's something incredibly unchanging about God, where he's fixed, he's a presence, he is the great I am. He doesn't change. He tells us in his word he doesn't change. But yet situations around us change. But just like David, we can learn almost that spiritual muscle memory as we learn to worship, as we learn to do that as part of our backstory. When we face the Goliaths in our world, which we can still use. We're ready and we're prepared. Yeah, exactly.
And so that's the key question. What are you anchored on? You know, because what you're anchored on, it's not the strength of the rope. It's the rope's important, but it's where is that anchor point is really important, rather than just you relying on yourself. So
great question for week 3, David as a warrior. Have a discuss in your e-groups, and we'll see you next week for week 4.
Come on.